You're invited to join us for our 2024 Sedona Transcendence Retreat, taking place during the fall equinox, right here in the spiraling vortex of Sedona, Arizona, featuring world-renowned psychics, channelers, and mediums, demonstrating their gifts and teaching their techniques. This immersive retreat includes indoor interactive workshops and outdoor vortex journeys. Just visit SedonaTranscendenceRetreat.com. We'll see you in Sedona. Introducing Lyssa Royal Holt, who's been a channeler and author since 1985. She is most known for her in-depth explorations of the nature of extraterrestrial consciousness and how it impacts human evolution. Greetings and thank you for joining us. How fortunate am I to be here with Lyssa Royal Holt in Sedona. Welcome, Lyssa.
Thank you so much.
And you used to live in Sedona back in the 80s.
Back in the day, 88 through 91, I was living here, yes.
And we were just saying how different it must have been then. It's so commercial now, even though we still got the powerful vortex and the beautiful red mountains.
It was very different. Part of the time I lived out here in the village, and it looks totally different. It's amazing. It's like a different place.
And you just live down in Phoenix now, so you're still an Arizonian.
Yes, I am. I can't let go of Arizona that easily.
Yeah, I like it here too. Mm-hmm. Moved here from California, which was just getting very crowded and expensive.
So did I. I moved here from LA.
Really? Mm-hmm. I was in San Diego.
Okay.
Yeah, and then ultimately in Northern California, but yeah, spent most of my life in San Diego.
Same reason. Yeah.
And so in Los Angeles, you attended UCLA.
No. I know where you're getting the UCLA thing. No, I did not attend UCLA, but I worked with professors at UCLA.
Okay, because
yes.
They had a program that they were studying channeling for personality integration and development.
Yes, exactly. So I was part of the group of new channels that were being studied by these professors. My teachers were being studied, and then we were their first students.
How exciting.
It was really exciting.
And especially because you and your family had a UFO sighting in 1979 that triggered your interest in extraterrestrial contact. Can you tell me about that?
Absolutely. I still remember the date, October 10th, 1979. I was at the University of New Hampshire, and I came home. My family was in New Hampshire at the time, just for a day visit. But we got a sudden snowstorm. And so I was looking out the window at the snow to see if I could go back to campus that night. And across the street was state land, and it was all forested. And I noticed suddenly there was this, it looked like a miniature sun. And it was floating just below the tree line, which meant that it was in the forest. And it was making all these strange maneuvers. And it was releasing like teardrops of fire. It was very strange. And I became really excited, and we opened the door, and I could hear this sound that was like a low-pitched whine, and it increased to a high-pitched whine, and then it disappeared. I was so excited, I wanted to run outside, and I was, maybe 18 at the time, and my family wouldn't let me go. And to this day, I regret not going. But that's the basic essence of that. And from that point on, I had to have the answers about the universe.
Yes. Maybe it was better you didn't run into that stream of radiation like Travis Walton did, though.
I don't know if it was that kind of craft.
That's right.
I do know the crafts from that era. A lot of the UFO sightings from that era had that kind of fire thing.
Right.
But I don't hear of that lately, so I don't know.
Did you ever have an intuitive hit later about who it was? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Because after eventually I graduated from college and I moved to Los Angeles, so now it's like 1983 or 1984, and I started to see structured craft in daylight over the 101 freeway in LA. And I thought I was imagining it. But the next morning on the radio, they were talking about a fleet of ships that were seen over the 101, and it was what we had seen.
Oh my goodness.
So then, that was the time I started to get involved with being trained as a channel. So eventually, when one of the beings I channel now, Sasha from the Pleiades, when she finally came through, I was able to put the pieces together and realize that I had been having these Pleiadian contacts throughout my life that were preparing me for the eventual channeling.
Sure. So Pleiadian,
yes.
Ah,
Yes.
I love that.
Yes.
Our beautiful Pleiadian cousins, as you call
Exactly.
them in your Prism of Lyra book.
Yes.
So what was that like to be working with a group that was interested in channeling, and then there were teachers teaching channeling?
Yes. Well, because my background was psychology, that was my degree,
Right.
I always have this skeptical mind. So always in the back of my mind, I'm trying to prove something, right, to myself. So in order to study channeling, I felt like I had to surmount that doubt about it. And for me, having teachers that were connected with UCLA and the psychology department, and there were a lot of therapists, I knew I was in good hands and I could trust it and I could relax. So that period of time was so exciting. And also that's when I met Daryl Anka, who channels Bashar.
Right.
And back then he was also part of that study. And he was doing channelings in a living room of one of the professors twice a week. Maybe there would be 10 to 20 people every week. So I would go when it was that few people. So we had, Bashar right there, full blast, 10 feet from us. It was amazing. It was magical.
And has he always been channeling the Essassani from day one?
I believe so, yes. I know he went through a training as well with another teacher named Tom Masari. So there's kind of like a lineage. And when he was trained, Bashar came through, and of course Bashar's existence and connection to him was connected to a UFO sighting Daryl had.
Oh.
It was either over the 101 or the 405 in LA, so it was a strange similarity of our experiences.
Interesting. Yes, we just had Bashar at a conference, and of course it was packed audience,
Yes.
and what he was bringing through. He's got such a sense of humor, and just so obviously the both of you ended up dedicating the rest of your lives to channeling and bringing forth this advanced knowledge and wisdom from these ET races who have long been involved with the development of humanity, of Earth spheres in general, of the creation of space-time and the hologram. I mean, I've been involved in this for decades as well, and studying a lot from both the spirituality and the scientific perspective, because kind of like yourself, I like some scientific validation behind my spiritual guidance, or some of the philosophical and spiritual views, and I love the practices and the belief systems, but I like some of the scientific support as well. But I have to say, Lyssa, your books and the way that you have laid them out to really clarify the founders and how their thought to not know thyself was so profound for me, because I have been telling people for decades, we are on a journey to know thyself. So when I read, this is a journey to unknow thyself, because clearly the infinite sea of consciousness is all-knowing. And so to fragment out of that is to start to unknow thyself and then to go back on a journey back to remembrance.
Yes.
So tell me about that. You know, so obviously this was written in the late 80s, 89?
89, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so it just started coming through from Sasha, and then ultimately Germaine came through at the end, but...
I think it's mostly Germaine.
Oh!
I started to
okay.
channel Germaine in 1988
Okay.
in Sedona, and so the book was actually channeled in Sedona when I lived here. Yes,
no kidding.
Yes, in West Sedona, in an apartment, I believe. And so back then, you know, I think I was still in my 20s. Yes, I would have been in my 20s. And as experience goes, I didn't have a lot of experience as a spiritual person or teacher, but the channelings were so specific and so profound for me. And even back then I was told, you might not understand all of this now, but as you unfold and as everyone on the world unfolds, they'll get to the deeper and deeper and deeper layers of what we're channeling. So I can see that now, but back then I couldn't. It was pretty amazing.
That is, and what you brought through is beyond amazing. And so, not to give it away, because if you have not read this, it is a must read. If you have any interest in Galactic Heritage, our connection to it, and how we are the expression of that.
Yes.
And it is encoded within every cell of our being and explains a lot about why we're here and the journey on planet Earth, right? And so a must read. But I would like to just briefly touch on some of the chapters as they unfold in the book, if that's okay
Sure.
with you.
Yes.
Okay. And so it really starts with what you call the dimensional infusion, and it really is an amplification of a thought, a desire to unknow thyself that then magically manifests that explosion into fragmentation. Do I have that?
Yes, of course, in order to explain such a big concept, all we can do is use metaphors, because it's beyond our capacity and our language to express. But it's the whole idea of how do we go from oneness or complete unity, complete integration into an experience of the illusion of separation. So this is something that Germaine over the years has been really trying to express, that even though the way the story is told, that it sounds like there's an explosion out, that in reality it's more like an explosion or a fragmentation inwardly from the one. Because we never leave
that's
the
the
one.
diagram you
Yes.
draw. Okay.
We never leave the one.
Okay.
But we go into this realm within the one that is the realm of separation, so we can have that illusion and go as far away from the remembrance of who we really are for that experience, and then hopefully savor the journey back to integration and oneness.
I saw a YouTube where you had drawn a circle, and then within, and that was the all, the one, and then within that circle there was another circle that demonstrated the fragmentation, and you drew like a grid.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so the ultimate idea behind it was that the one is emptiness and fullness all at once, and then the fragmentation is in the center. So when you reintegrate, you sort of come back into the emptiness and fullness.
Exactly, and to some degree you could say that that middle grid part gets erased because it was an illusion to begin with.
Whoa.
So some people misunderstand the idea when we hear, oh, this reality is an illusion. Well, yes and no. What we're experiencing is still real. The experience, the feeling, is real. But the framework that we give to it as being this separate reality is real is not real. It's just like a dream to us. We wake up and it's not, it's just a dream. When the one wakes up, its experience in separation was just a dream too. Even though it felt real at the time.
Right. I mean, our senses are what makes it real, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I love the ideas behind like neuroscience and, you know, of course, quantum physics, where they're really talking about like, it's just the charges that are firing in the brain that ignite the senses to think that this is real.
Yes.
Our, you know, seeing, hearing, touching,
Yes.
feeling.
Yes.
By the way, Ron is sitting behind the camera.
Hello. Hello.
Lisa's beautiful husband. So if you see me looking over this way once in a while, I'm connecting with Ronald. Thank you for coming, Ronald.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. And so then from that dimensional infusion, then you have the first race of beings, which end up being the founders, and they're really the architects of creation, the physical realities.
Yes. And they, again, our language is so limiting because, yes, we can call them a race, but actually they're not really a race because they weren't really physical. And also they weren't individual at this point. They're still collective energies. But we see them as like an archetypal imagery. Sometimes, what is the cover of the book? Okay, I'm thinking of the first edition.
Okay.
The first edition shows a being of what the founders look like, which are usually tall and willowy, big head, big eyes, the kind of standard ET looking being, but that's just a representation. Sometimes they're experienced as praying manti as well.
Mm-hmm.
So at that level of consciousness, it's all archetype. But yet, they laid the foundation for the further separation and oversaw it and guide us to this day. And they even guide some of the older civilizations like the Pleiadians and the Sirians who have already awakened. The founders are still considered like guides for them too.
I like your use of the disco ball, and it's interesting. I wrote a book called Rise Up, and it came to me one day that if a disco ball was in the center of a room, that it would reflect all of these different colors on the walls. And what a perfect place for the oversoul
Yes.
to be inside of there so that it could see itself in 360 degrees. Right? And I wrote about that. And then I read in your book, you use the same analogy where, yeah, it's the little squares on the disco ball, which each one represents a different perspective from a
Exactly.
spherical point of view. That kind of reminds me of the founders
Yes.
inside that.
Exactly. The founder energy is very much connected with that kind of disco ball. I know what we're talking about is like really out there, but yes, exactly right. And I can't find a better analogy than that, because what you said is true, that it's slightly different perspectives, each of the little fragments of the mirror. Where we get caught in our physicality and individuality is thinking that my perspective of reality means I'm separate, where it's only just different perspectives, and there's not how many billions of eyes that we have on our planet looking into this reality. It's one consciousness looking through all the eyes, one consciousness looking through the different pieces of the disco ball.
And there's the fragmentation, right? So the founders begin this journey of fragmentation, which just continues to fragment and fragment and fragment and fragment into all of these different races. And of course that sounds linear, and it's not, it's simultaneous.
Exactly.
But there does seem to be an unfoldment, linear or not. It's the way that things progressed. And so then you talk about this white hole located in the Lyran star system, or the region of it.
The area of it, or
Yes,
from
right.
our point of view, yeah.
And it was different back then than it is now.
Mm-hmm.
But in that region, there was a white hole that when you shine a light through it, there you have the 7 colors of the rainbow.
That basically the 7 colors represent what Germain calls the 7 densities. So it's different states of consciousness that move from the most unified to the most separated. And we've been, as humans, and other physical species too, expressing the most separated, which they call 3rd density. And we're moving out of that now into 4th density. So we're starting, as we integrate, we're moving into a new state of consciousness, which would be like a different color on the rainbow, using that as an analogy. And as we continue to integrate, you continue to move 5th density. Again, it's not linear, but our language is linear, and it's the best way to describe it. Moving back home to founder level, 7th density, and eventually the sphere again.
Okay. Now this saga that unfolds is a cosmic saga. I mean, that's the word that keeps coming up for me as we experience first the Lyrans, and they seem to have a more masculine energy, and then the Vegans veer off of that with a desire to have a more inward experience.
To have a more inward experience, and their intention originally was to explore more of the feminine. But what they didn't understand was that, in a sense, our galaxy leans more toward the masculine. And Andromeda Galaxy leans more toward the feminine, and we're very balanced and linked together. So the journeys for us in this galaxy tend to be more masculine. So the Vegans, even though the intention was to go into the spirit, they ended up going into the mind. And a lot of their lineage shows that, which you read about in the book Prism of Lyra.
Yeah, the intellectualizing
Mhm.
of the spiritual
The
path.
pushing down the emotions and all of that.
But still, they came up with Vegan mysticism
Yes.
that shows up even in our ancient mystery schools, particularly Vedic, which I thought was kind of interesting. Vegan and Vedic,
Yeah.
right?
A lot of it is in the Vedic mysticism, surely.
That was a major focus of mine for a while back in around 2012 when I was in Northern California. There was a whole organization that was studying the Vedic path and how the Rig Veda scriptures and all of that, right?
Well, the Vegans laid the foundation for the Vegan mysticism early on, before they became more distorted. So later on, they were trying to implement the teachings that they had already created, but they were implementing them in distorted ways. Like, an example of that would be becoming so disciplined with themselves, like you'd see in the most disciplined ascetics on our world, that you take yourself out of balance in your spiritual path because you're overly disciplined.
Right.
So it took them a while to, because all of us that go into separation have to go through that deepest level of separation before we then awaken. So they went through the same thing. Eventually they saw what they were doing, as did the other of our galactic family, and eventually were able to climb out of the hole of that deep separation they created for themselves.
And so from Vega, then you have, so you call Lyra the womb. Let's talk about Sirius. And the chapter is called the Sirius Factor. What was their role then? And this is happening sort of simultaneously, if you will.
From the bigger picture, simultaneously, if you are to stretch it out in linear time, the Sirian civilization's younger, much younger than the Vegans.
Okay.
So if we look in a linear way at the lineage, it would be Vega, which beget a lot of other civilizations, the Zeta, and the Sirians are the kind of the most recent ones.
Okay.
they are super connected with us on Earth because they were here in the ancient times. They were some of the ancient ETs that were here, specifically the ones you see like, I think in Egyptian mysticism and South American with the big long heads and the slightly darker skin. Those were a lot of the Sirian teachers that were here in the ancient time. So they too went through their wound and their healing as well. And each of the different civilizations have their wound and their healing. A lot of that information is not so much in Prism of Lyra, but it's more reflected in the card system.
Okay. I believe I read that the Vegans were the first to come to planet Earth when it became inhabitable.
Very ancient times, yes.
Like dinosaur?
Yes, dinosaur and pre-human.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then here and there after that. But my understanding, when Germaine talks about this, there was a period of time on our Earth where there were, let's say, territorial disputes by some of the ETs. And so he doesn't talk about those periods because he feels it's distracting for what he is here to teach. So there was a period when, like, it was mostly Lyrans here, and then it was mostly Vegans here, depending on the political situation, let's say.
Right.
Ancient times we're talking about.
Because I believe I did read that then the Lyrans came, so the Vegans started to then insert some of the primate DNA just for their adaptability to the Earth plane, the Earth's environment. But then the Lyrans, on the other hand, were doing some of the work for the founders where they were actually up-leveling the species by inserting their DNA.
There was a lot going on.
Right? And then the Vegans realized the Lyrans were here doing their thing, and then they ended up leaving.
And then, now that's really ancient history.
Okay.
That's played out even more dramatically in some of the more recent ancient history, which would be when the Pleiadians were here in the ancient times. But at that time, they were Lyrans.
Okay. Got you.
Yeah. I sorry, you guys. I know this is a lot. If you haven't read the book, you might not know what we're talking about. But there were two lineages of Pleiadians. So there were those that came directly from Lyra, and there were those who first came to Earth in the ancient time, utilized the primate DNA, so they altered themselves slightly, and eventually left and went back to the Pleiades. So there's two, like, kind of lineage lines connected with the Pleiadians.
Right. It seems like maybe the Vegans left to find another place where they could have an experience of hopefully more spirituality or what have you, and they found the Pleiades, but then they had already been implanted with some of the primate DNA, and then the Earth Inception project, right? And they recruited the Pleiades to come.
And the Sirians, yes, and that's a whole other drama that they had here at that time as well, because different groups had different intentions. And I'm not saying negative intentions, it's just different intentions for the trajectory of how they thought Earth should move to eventually achieve the goal of integration. So at some point, though, everyone had to leave. And that was part of our evolution as a civilization. Because at some point, we go into a sleep cycle, which was about 13,000 years ago, when that type of influence needs to move away so we can digest the seeds that were given to us and then create our own destiny.
Perfectly said.
So now, 13,000 years later, the seeds that we planted from the gifts they gave to us are starting to come to fruition. And now we're moving into the potential for our awakening as a civilization.
And many of those ancient races in linear time have achieved their awakening and ascension.
Yes, but they are assisting us in other ways now. In the old days, they were here physically assisting us in schools and teaching and things like that. Now, it's not so much the physical contact yet, but it's a lot of through channeling or through transmission,
Yes.
even through light language, and
Mhm.
it's a level up of the kind of assistance they were giving us 13,000 years ago.
And even though they physically left, we were left with the biological encoding.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of it, as I think it's in Prism of Lyra, especially with the Sirians, they implanted.
Yes.
It sounds like evil. It's not meant that way. It's like an alarm clock. That when our frequency reaches a certain level, these codes start activating, and they assist us, they boost us in our awakening process.
I had never heard it that way.
That's what's happening now.
Yes, I mean, you know, you hear a lot about the more you raise your frequency, you activate dormant DNA and merge with more advanced consciousness and remember who you are as these different more advanced races, then you ignite dormant DNA. But I hadn't heard, right, that inserted was sort of this monitor of your frequency level, and when it reaches a certain point, it naturally starts to activate the dormant DNA.
Yeah. And from what I am told by Sasha and Hamón, who's the Sirian that I
Yep.
channel, that this assistance from older races to younger races is considered a sacred duty. That this is part of what they know is necessary in creation. And it's done in a way that's never interfere. I don't even know if that's a word, but meaning that we're always given the option. Are we going to make the choices to up-level ourselves? Which basically has to do with, are we willing to surrender polarity? And once we are, then all the seeds start activating and they help to till the garden.
Okay. It seems like there was some stipulation, maybe it comes from Star Wars or Star Trek or something, right, where they couldn't interfere with any planetary race until they mastered space travel or something.
My understanding is there are certain markers that they know they cannot cross.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things they had to learn as their species development, which we will have to learn eventually as we interact with younger species too, is where is the line between assistance and interference.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And eventually, I've come to see that as, a friend of mine calls it natural law, which is basically when the universe flows through you and guides you in a way that is not egoic, for no egoic agenda, to assist another, that's an expression of natural law. So for those helpers, those ET helpers that we have, when they see our evolution, they are compelled, in a sense, by the universe, through them, to assist at just the right level for what we need in that moment that is not interfering.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
It does, and it, you know, when you just said, if we then, as an advanced species in the future, were to assist another younger planetary sphere, it really is a fine line. I think you gave an example of the Pleiadians having come here and the less evolved races thinking of them as gods because, you know, they came from the sky, and it becomes then challenging for those who are seen in such a light to not get full of themselves and start to become authoritative, or yeah.
And you look at also on the karmic level in terms of their development. There's like species karma, but there's also individual karma, meaning that, for example, the species that were here in the ancient past, I'll use the Sirians as an example because they had kind of a dramatic experience for themselves. There were groups, depending on their level of development, that had egoic wishes for helping humanity. And that always got them in trouble. But as they matured, their assistance became more unconditional, more without egoic intent. But then, 13,000 years ago, when it became obvious we were going into a sleep cycle that we had to experience, and they had to pull away, when they pulled away, they then activated in themselves their own guilt, their own feeling of imagining a parent abandoning a child. What would you feel? So that for them was their karmic lesson that they had to learn to grow themselves into natural law. So when we are dealing with a younger species, or they are dealing with us, it's not just the younger ones that are going through the training, it's the older ones too, because they're refining themselves into allowing themselves to be vessels for natural law.
Like any parent-child relationship.
Exactly.
But certainly, on that note, abandonment being a really core wound for humanity.
Exactly. This is something, I know we haven't talked about the cards yet, but when Germaine was creating the card system is a way to kind of implement the wisdom and prism of Lyra into our own evolution and work with the unfinished parts of ourselves that are connected to our galactic lineage. So when he created the card system, the number one wound for humanity was abandonment. Because any child that is abandoned by a parent will go through some type of abandonment wound. And so for us then on Earth, collectively, we experience that abandonment, which ultimately was, as strange as it might sound, the main reason for the creation of religion was to fill that hole and cover over the pain of that wound. And then of course we see where religion has taken us.
You're right. But there may have been some intention to reconnect us to the heavens.
Exactly, yes.
Yes. Well, let's bring in those cards.
Okay.
I've been having such a good time with these cards. And by the way, Lyssa has an incredible YouTube that really helps to explain these cards, and you're channeling Germaine.
Yes.
And a lot of it has to do, I better not drop my glasses because I won't be able to read this. So they come in this size, and then there's actually a smaller, more portable size maybe, but
This is the first edition.
Oh,
the current
okay.
edition is smaller. Yes.
Okay, yeah. And so I'm just sort of learning how to use them and the different spreads and such, but the cards 1 through 53 really, and then 54 is sort of this transitional card, is the descent into the unknowing or the unremembering, if that's a word, and then the journey back to remembrance. So it's like denser into more and more fragmentation and polarity, and then the ascension back into more light and unity.
Exactly.
And then I want to bring it ultimately back around to where we're at on the planet right now. Right?
Yeah.
Because really, I mean, that's what we're sort of talking about, is how all of these galactic races and the history of all of that have influenced planet Earth's journey, and each of us individually and collectively, and led us to where we're at now, and then where are we going?
Yes.
But yeah, these cards are really indicative of all of that. And your artist, David
Cow, yes.
Cow, yeah, wow, what an incredible job that he's done. And so let's just touch on some of the cards and the purpose of the way they're laid out, starting with, now you didn't start out with 0, which would be the one of, right? The one consciousness,
yes.
Looking through many lenses.
Yes.
But we do start with 1, and that's the founders, beyond wisdom.
Yes.
And then this galactic, I kind of like to call it the galactic pulse, right?
Yes.
Because sort of pulsating out of that founder group consciousness, then all of these galactic races, and this is all about our Milky Way galactic family.
In general, except
right, as soon as I said that.
Yeah.
But you did this for sort of a contrast, right?
Yes, exactly.
With
Exactly.
the infinities.
Exactly. She studied the YouTubes. She's talking about a series of YouTubes that explain all the cards.
I mean, there's one that's, I think, over an hour long with a group, and you have a whole graphic of all the cards, and it's just it's an incredible way to learn about the cards and, you know, their meaning, and then not really how to use them, but that's really explained well in the handbook of the different spreads. And so Arcturus, that's why one of the reasons I really wanted to go through these, because I just want to touch on some of these, because we didn't really touch on the gateway of Arcturus.
Yeah.
So can you briefly give us an overview of Arcturus?
Yes. If, again, doing it linearly, if we are looking at this idea of the fragmentation, right, and we're moving from non-physicality to physicality, there's a doorway between physicality and non-physicality. And there are, let's say, guardians of that doorway. And they are referred to as the Arcturians, or the archetypal Arcturus consciousness, which is very balanced, male-female, positive-negative energy. And so they are like a midwife. How do we experience the energy as humans? Is through birth and through death, usually. I mean, through our life, yes. But the main times are as we are born, we in a sense pass through that doorway before we go into physicality, and when we die, we pass through the doorway again as we move back into non-physicality. But they're also very much associated with healing and heart energy, unconditional love. So a lot of people that are doing healing work are tapping into that archetypal Arcturus energy, even though they might, even if you're not interested in galactic history, we're just talking about frequencies. It's not so much the star itself.
And many people at this time feel tuned in to Arcturians for whatever reason. Maybe it's where they're at in their life today, and that's why the cards are so wonderful too. It kind of gives you a snapshot of where you're at the moment that you're using them. I remember when I moved to Sedona, I went to this store, the Crystal Magic, and they had all these books, and I swear this book by Tom Kenyon, the Arcturian Anthology, pushed itself out of the bookshelf. I'm not kidding. And it felt like it was even illuminated, and I was like, what is this? And then I saw Arcturian, and I just knew I had to know everything there was about Arcturians, and from that day it has remained like the primary star race I'm fascinated by, interested in, and feel really connected to. But emotional healing for Arcturus, combined with the physical healing focus of Sirian, and you talk about a Sirius-Arcturus Matrix. Can you expand on that idea?
Yes, this was information I channeled 30 years ago, so I don't know that Germaine is using that terminology anymore. But in general, I could say that what you just said, the physical healing level and the emotional healing level, that the Arcturus energy and what I could call the third era Sirian energy, which is the non-physical, the really high frequency, form a beautiful balance for the physical and emotional healing.
Okay. And that's the other fascinating thing about the cards, is you go from, there are parallel realities, like Daryl Anka Bashar, the parallel reality that Bashar is from or of through the Essassani. And then you have parallel written on like Arcturus, but then you also have, for some of the other star races, past and then ultimately future, because there's first, second, and third eras.
Exactly. This is something Germaine has said, if he could redo the cards, this is something he would make more clear. Because the cards say, the cards have a timeline, past, present, future, parallel. And he says what is more accurate is first era, second era, third era. First era is the era of the civilization where they were a young species, where they had their wounds, their initial wounds come up. Second era is when the civilization, which is past, noted as past in the card, present in the cards, is the era where the species starts to go into their healing process, which is where we are now as humans.
Okay.
And then the third era, noted there as future, is when the civilization awakens. They can remain physical or they can go into non-physical, but it's the awakened energy of that species. And the parallel is not locked into the eras, so to speak. So Arcturus, for example, not necessarily a physical species in the way we understand it, is noted as parallel.
Timeless.
Timeless.
Okay.
Mhm.
Fascinating. And then so here, in the descension into more polarized fragmentation, it's past.
Right.
For most of these star races. And of course we have Lyra and then Vega, which was the source of Vegan mysticism and some of the, and then you have, I like these cards, you have just like some random cards that are not grouped. And so this alienness, which I think a lot of people experience this, you went into it, but it's like alienation, feeling of being a stranger in a strange land.
Exactly. A lot of people feel that way, yes.
Right.
And it's also meant archetypally to include the species that are not necessarily humanoid, but that a lot of us maybe have had lifetimes in those types of civilizations. So they're included in the deck in that way.
Okay, non-humanoid, parallel. And then the reptilian. And, thank you for recognizing all these different reptilian races and really how the reptilians came into being with this initial, like injecting the reptilian DNA to create these different vegan humanoid and then vegan humanoid reptilian and then reptilian.
It's all a big smoothie.
Right? But then the reptilian left and generally went to Orion and some of Lyra.
And some of Lyra, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As I understand the lineages, yes. I mean, there's probably a lot more out there that they're not giving because Germain was trying to focus on what was relevant for us.
Very good. Yeah. And there's Primal Fear.
The one reptilian card is the Primal Fear card because the reptilian energy, for some people, they get triggered by it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is definitely connected to us processing our fear.
Yes. And fear is a way to learn and grow and expand and
Exactly.
and insectoid.
Insectoid, archetypal insectoid.
That's a cute picture.
I know,
of
David
you.
says. The art is very cute there.
Okay, Zeta. And we didn't really go into that, how really the Zeta race came into being from Vegan. Mm-hmm.
If you took the Vegan wound of separating the mental and emotional body and you put it on steroids, then you would have the the Zeta experience where they really separated and really pushed down the emotions and became so out of balance that they nearly destroyed their species. So they had to then find a road back to the integration of the mental and emotional bodies.
And then have contracts with some humans to be engaged in an experiment, if you will, or an enhancement of their emotional body through these temporary detainment experiences. Sounds so much better than abduction.
Bashar's term, we'll give him credit.
Is it? Oh, okay.
Well, as far as I know it is, yeah.
And really, it's a give and take.
Yes, it's not, well, this is a whole tangent we won't go into, but I know there's a lot of fearful stories about it, but a lot of it is through the filter of our wounds, so we don't see it clearly. On their level, it's not like that. And on the level at which we've accepted that experience, it's not like that. But as it filters into the human level, if we have wounds that are left to be unprocessed, we're going to perceive it that way, in a painful way.
Okay. I've often thought with that sort of DNA experiment, and even Earth being a lab for that type of DNA experimentation, that since the beginning it's been an intermixing of different DNA. And maybe for some to create an ideal type of race. But as you said, and it was either in Golden Lake or the Prism of Lyra, that it's the soul, it's the consciousness that we're trying to idealize or perfect, not the physical vehicle.
Exactly. The physical vehicle will reflect the consciousness. So the consciousness has to come first. Sorry. Yeah, right.
But I mean, there's so much, and we could talk for 3 hours easily on all of this.
I just did a 2-day workshop on this a few days ago, so yeah, it could be a lot of hours.
But because every card expands into a whole nother train of thought.
Yes.
Which is good, because it's then allows you to expand your consciousness, and it's a journey of exploration on many levels. But it just always wants to bring me back to where we're at now and what's happening on our planet now, and some of those in control because of the history of even the Lyrans felt like their quick path to evolution, right, was to conquer the universe, and this, if they don't exist, if they're not controlling, right, and that's feels like something that's happening on the planet now with technology and trying to create the perfected vehicle, even in a technological way, right? So thank you for bringing it back to, it's not the physical vehicle, it's the consciousness.
And we have to always remember that when we see people out there that we think are controllers, they're not separate from us. It's all the disco ball, like you said, with the different perspective, thinking that's the way home. No, this is the way home. No, this is the way home. But it's all us trying to find our way home through the different apertures through which we're seeing our reality. So we always have, when we get lost in blaming these negative people or the government or whatever, we get lost into the spiral of separation worse. So that's part of right now when you talk about being interested in what's happening on the planet right now. That's like the most important thing that we have to keep in mind as we are journeying through this bumpy road right now, is that nothing is the fault of anything out there. It's our consciousness and the kinks in our consciousness that are still separated, trying to work their way to the surface and being released.
And just honoring the role that everyone has come here to play, and not labeling it good, bad. It all just is. And if we have the opportunity to get off this wheel on an ascension journey, wonderful. And there's a lot of people who are heralding humanity in that direction, but there's also possibly on this wheel a descension back into dark ages, and there's those who have to herald humanity back into that too. And so we've just all come here to play these different roles.
And every civilization, every physical civilization has had a thread of ones that don't choose to go into the awakening. And then they have to find other ways, whether it's parallel realities or other planetary systems, in which to continue to explore that idea.
And they're just not ready. They're not at that level on their evolutionary journey, and they're still learning. They're still learning through separation and duality, and that's one way to learn.
But because we're all one, our awakening provides the momentum for them in their future endeavors to move upward in their awareness. So each of us then make a difference for all those that maybe are still resisting the process.
Yes. It reminds me of all of our different soul aspects too, and how if one becomes more awakened than another, it affects the other, but the soul, the big karmic entanglement, right? And it's the oneness, ultimately. Solar consciousness. Can you describe this card?
Yes, this is the card that's representing our sun. And because sun is, suns are doorways, basically.
Right.
There's a couple of levels to this card. One is that it's a doorway to all the other suns, because they're all connected. but also archetypally speaking in the deck, it's representing our higher self
Mm-hmm.
or our higher nature.
Yeah. I've always felt like the sun was a divine portal.
Mhm,
I mean, it's a
exactly.
portal to the great central sun at the core of creation.
Exactly.
It's a portal of divine consciousness, and I'm always like doing sun practices and
Yes.
praying to the lords and ladies of light, and it seems to make magical miracles manifest.
Oh,
so
yes.
I keep doing it. Orion. And Orion seems like a really mixed bag. I mean, it's been categorized, especially like in the Law of One, as the service to self
Versus
constellation.
service, yeah.
And
Well,
there's some
first
reasons for
era it was.
that.
So that's why it's a mixed bag. The Orions were the ones that chose for all of us to go through the deepest, darkest level of separation. So their lessons have provided the momentum for our integration of polarity too. So their healing, that's their first era. Their second era, their healing was also as dramatic and profound, like bringing two chemicals together that explode. That's how their awakening happened, in that dramatic fashion. And then their third era, I know I'm jumping ahead in the cards,
Oh, that's okay, yeah.
but their third era, which is the last cards of the deck, Germaine said specifically because their integration of polarity was so dramatic that they totally transcended into light and are now some of the main cheerleaders for us that are providing the momentum for us to integrate our polarity.
That feels really good. And how the indigenous cultures, Egyptian all the way to Hopi, refer to those three belt stars as the gateways to the gods. And I diverse, but my father had a really profound missing time experience way back in 1950. And growing up, my father just pointed to those three belt stars and, knew that they were very significant for humanity. And so rather than, seeing that as a place of selfish beings, right?
Yes.
They've gone through their process and now they're super powerful, awakened, ascended beings in support of our ascension.
Exactly. Yep.
I love that. Very
So
good.
the pyramids on our world
Right.
are a reminder for us of the path our ancestors have taken and how we maybe shouldn't fall into that same path, but also an energy of momentum for us to integrate our polarity as well. So they're really gateways to those Orion, the different Orion eras, depending on where your focus is.
Right, aligned with the three belt stars, and then here in this desert southwest, the three Hopi mesas aligned with the three belt stars of Orion, and their whole story about the Sirian. Kachinas, which we can talk about once we go out on the land. Yes. And interesting with service to self and service to others, and the way that you've described it, or Germaine has described it, is so interesting because it's not like one is better than the other necessarily, because the service to self has a notion that by serving the self, they're serving the whole. And you wrote this, so I'm just it's not like I'm telling you this. You're like, yes, and I wrote that. But the service to others can actually go so far as to relinquish the self or their value to put others first.
This is a very good point, because the dynamics of the Orion energy, I just said their integration was very dramatic, right? So they had to go to the very edge of separation, the darkest, deepest as possible, in order to, and the light as far, far, far into the light as possible. So when you have the two intense poles, when they come together, then the awakening or the transcendence is all that much more intense. And so that's how they did it. I don't think we're going to do it that way, but I mean, who wants to go through that? I know I don't, but they did it for us.
I kid you not, I just had a large conference here in Sedona my presentation prior to diving into this material was the middle way is an ascension portal.
Totally. Absolutely 100% spot on. They could only get to the middle way, the Orions, through this dramatic way. But they, and especially the Sirians, are now teaching us more about the middle way, as they call it the point of paradox. When you can see both poles existing simultaneously without an attachment to either is the way.
Yeah, non-attachment, non-judgment. One of my first practices, spiritual, was Buddhism. Dove deeply into Buddhism for many years. And of course, they're about the middle way.
Yeah.
You know, but I just wanted to bring it not out of Buddhism, but into more clarity for the large audience to, you know, say that, you know, we honor both the roles of the light and the dark on our journey, and we chose to come into this reality of duality. And so really balancing the light and the dark, the masculine and feminine, is the key to ascension. Because on the spiritual path, you can tend toward the light so much. And there was a race that did this in your book, where they negated negativity so much that they became isolated completely.
Yes, they forced utopia, I think, in Golden Lake. Yes, to the point where you can't force utopia, right?
Right.
So it was not in a balanced way. So you can take negative or positive in either direction to the point of too extreme.
Absolutely, that's what it was about in Buddhism. The the extremes aren't healthy. It's more coming to a middle place. And I think that's such a good lesson for us in the here and now as well, that in the galactic history, this particular race became so isolated that they became unaware, even with their open heart to serve, of the struggles that other star systems were going through. And once they were visited, I think, by the Lyrans, who kind of snapped them back into, you know, like, be grounded and centered in what's happening in the greater galaxy, because you're here to serve, that then they set out on a mission to serve those who are suffering. So it's not like having your head in your center looking the other way. It's really grounding and centering and say, how can I serve to alleviate the suffering, Buddhism, and then on my own awakening and ascension journey. Because service, as we know, is a huge part of that.
That was definitely one of the Pleiadians' path. There is a card in there expressing that, the devotion to service card.
Ah, okay, on the way back home. That's weird.
On the way back home,
This is the Pleiadian past and the Sirian past, which we kind of dove into. And now we get into the Earth cards. How exciting. The Lemurian Era, right? I mean, how many of us are obsessed with Lemurians?
Well, it makes sense because I have to define what is meant by eras, because Germain always talks about Lemuria and Atlantis as eras rather than places. And he says Atlantean era is the last 13,000 years. The Lemurian era was 13,000 to 26,000 years ago.
Okay.
So that was our summer and spring cycle, the last one. The Atlantean era was our winter and autumn cycle, which we're just coming out of.
Okay.
So no wonder so many people are attracted to the Lemurian energy, because it's representing the spring and summer cycles that we're now moving into, which we've already been into before, but a very, very long time ago. And now we're moving into it with the momentum of all we've learned and healed in the last 26,000 years.
And is there a connection between the Pleiadians and the Lemurians?
In the sense that they were here during that Lemurian cycle, specifically like 13,000 to maybe like 20,000, I don't know exactly years ago, but they were actively here and during that era and actively working with the new humans. So that's where the connection is. And
maybe not so much a place, more a type of consciousness.
Yes.
Even though we tend to say there was a Lemurian continent and an Atlantean continent.
Which could be true, but Jermaine doesn't want to focus on that.
Okay.
He wants to focus more on what he considers to be the more important idea of that.
The consciousness during
The
that
consciousness
era.
during that era, yes.
Okay, I like that. And then the Atlantean era.
Mhm.
And the missing link, which I've always found so fascinating, right? It's when we became Homo sapien
Yes.
overnight.
Yes, and there's lots of layers to that card. Because sometimes the missing, and it depends on how you're reading it with people, but sometimes the missing link is consciousness itself. And if you look at, right now, everybody thinks spirituality and science are two very different things. Well, the missing link is consciousness is what brings them together. So that card has a lot of different layers to it.
Oh, that was beautifully said. My TV network is called SciSpy.tv, merging science and spirituality to give us answers to the greatest mysteries of
It's
creation.
perfect.
We have a lot in common.
Oh, perfect, perfect.
My next idea, whoa, is because I started watching a lot of religious stuff because of the end times ideas, and I became like pretty fascinated with the Book of Revelations, which is like mind-blowing. And then, you know, some of these YouTubes of different churches that are talking about the end time prophecies and such, but still really like condescending toward many things which would be more spiritually inspired. And one of my family members looked at me at a family gathering and said, "The only place I'm divisive is in my faith."
Okay. Paradox.
Right?
Paradox.
That was awesome. I was like, I believe that about religion, but I'm keeping, you know, there was things I wanted to say, but I wanted to keep the peace more. So I didn't. But it was like, we're all about unity. In any case, what if there was an opportunity to merge spirituality and religion to really create more unity? And then I realized with Sci-Spy, like, what if you had spirituality and religion and it's spiral? And then I went, whoa, spiral? I mean, wow,
Perfect,
Mr.
perfect.
Sacred Geometry, right? Spiral? Like,
Suzanne, I cannot believe your research. You are a phenom.
I'm telling you, I'm like trying to keep up with her.
Yeah.
This is still rolling, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Audience members love this.
Okay. I'm like, not many people can exhaust me. And I'm not exhausted. I'm just like, because I'm a fast processor, not many people are faster than me, maybe. Okay.
So anyways, if I get the courage to do that, Spiral's my next project. Okay, anyways.
Spiral ties it all together.
Isn't
Sacred
that
geometry wise, yes.
Whoa, who knew?
The ancients knew.
Right?
Yeah.
And
We forgot for a while.
an opportunity to maybe unite through that symbol. Okay, back to the cards. Abandonment, certainly. And I've always wondered if just, you know, this idea of Mother, Father, God, Goddess, like throwing us out there into the far reaches of time and space wasn't really the original abandonment wound.
Well, yes, you're right. You're 100% right. And Jermaine talks about that, but he said to heal that is harder. So
Okay.
if you work on your abandonment wounds that are closer to your physical experience, then it can reverberate back to the original abandonment. But you're spot on with that.
That makes so much sense because either way it's a parent-child relationship, really.
Mhm.
Conservative attachments?
That is representing how we're too scared to give up the old way of doing things. Whether it's on a collective level or even on an individual level, like I don't want to change brands of tea or something, you know? I mean,
Right.
it's whatever
Right.
we're attached to that we can't let go of.
Coffee. Guilty as charged. sugar. Okay. Progressive desires.
That is when we want change so bad that we try to push it when the energy's not ready. And then it all falls apart. So again, we're talking about middle road. The attachment, the conservative attachment, the too much progressive wanting change right now, we've got to find the middle road.
So well said. You get a lot of people these days, and it's okay, everything is okay, there is no judgment, but really wanting to jump off the 3D grid or become completely unplugged from it. And I gave a presentation about this at a conference recently, and people in the audience were standing up and saying thank you, because we do not have an alternate system right now.
Yeah.
So go ahead and unplug, but if I stop paying my taxes right now, they'll take away my horse ranch, they'll take away my home, like they'll levy it if I don't pay my property taxes, my personal taxes. Like I want to have a driver's license still, and if I get a ticket, I'm gonna pay it. I'm not gonna claim, but that no judgment, it's just progressive desires. It's a perfect example. We may not be ready yet because there doesn't exist a system is not in place that's alternatively effective.
And our systems are connected to our consciousness. So if the system is not in place yet, our consciousness is not capable yet of sustaining that kind of system, which would ultimately need to be a non-polarized system, and we're not there yet.
Yes. Good card.
But have patience.
Yes, and that's what we're about. We're architects of the new earth. So yay, let's move toward that, and so our consciousness can catch up with it, and thus our systems.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that brings us to belief systems.
Yeah, here we go.
These are the two
Those are the two cards
that really are a bridge to ascending.
Yes. Yes, if you look at the idea of the separation, and then as you go deeper into separation, you go like on a bell curve down. So what is the thing or the bridge that you have to surmount in order to shift the new consciousness? And it's card number 53, the belief systems card. And our belief system structure is what holds us stuck. So a lot of the work we do, especially shadow work, has to go into the belief systems, because a lot of our belief systems were created from our wounds. So we have to go into that healing in order to shift our belief systems, which then leads to card 54, new consciousness, and we start going up through the process of integration now. So that's where we are. Jermaine has said right now, if on the card system, we are in card 53, trying to let go of our belief systems and move into the new consciousness.
It is really those limiting beliefs that hold us back. First, individually, I do spiritual counseling with a lot of people really having a difficult time finding their worthiness, breaking through those limiting beliefs that they can be limitless. And so really supporting them on that path. And many people wanting to take a leap of faith right now into a new way of living and being, but the golden handcuffs are keeping them trapped in a job that pays the bills. And so what's the bridge that you can, create that, still you can afford to eat and, have shelter and transportation, but that ultimately serve in a way that feels more spiritually inspired. It's really the key, right? And that applies to humanity at large. And so then we begin our journey home, and it starts with fusion and magic, with the Orions.
That is what I was talking about before, the coming together of those deeply polarized energies, which is the alchemy that happens that begins to create their transcendence.
Healing, leap of faith, and seduction and addiction, and thank you for bringing that in, because it seems like there's a lot of healing going on in that regard now, while at the same time it feels like we have this huge drug addiction problem on the planet right now. So it's part of the ascension back into unity.
Yes, and also addiction on the subtler levels has to even do with our emotional addictions. What behavior patterns do we use to stop ourselves from feeling our pain and thus healing it? So that addiction level is all different levels.
Yeah.
Addiction card is representing all different levels.
Okay. And then here we are with Sirius in the present day.
Which is second era, so this is when they started to awaken.
Coming full circle.
Yep.
Okay. And then the Pleiadian present, seeking karmic balance, devotion to service,
Yep.
refining galactic lineage. I just love the Pleiadian. So, like, all of these things are so relevant in, you know, the spiritual community right now, and what everyone's talking about and really tuning back into.
Yes, yes.
So the Pleiadians are, you know, certainly, like, you consider them the cousins, have a really profound influence on the human consciousness
Yes.
and the journey.
Yes.
And the Lyra, self-observance, generosity, complete surrender.
That was a key for them, because now she's talking about the third era Lyra cards. So this is their awakening, and it's also what were the tools that helped them in their awakening.
Yes.
And because if you go to their first era, they were so into manifesting their reality and in a sense controlling things, that complete surrender is the healer to that compulsion of theirs.
Definitely a way. It was an important way for me to awaken on my journey, was a surrender experience I had on a mountaintop way back in the mid-90s, which led to my whole spiritual exploration and evolution. I was at a Doreen Virtue conference way back in the day, and she was on stage with one of her glorious gowns, and in front of this whole audience on this stage, she fell to her knees, and I was like, "Your gown!" You know, she always dressed like a princess. And she fell to her knees in surrender, because she was showing the audience how the physical act of literally just falling to your knees and surrendering to your higher self, to the higher way, to higher consciousness, can be really powerful.
And sometimes, unfortunately, as humans, we have to get to that point of desperation before we surrender.
Right?
But that changes as we move into fourth density, where surrender becomes more natural rather than pushed through desperation.
Right. Right. Well, that was for me. I came to a point of desperation. I was like seeking any higher guidance. But that's how desperation serves. That's how suffering serves. It's awakening from suffering. It's only that suffering that compels us to seek a higher way, another way out of suffering.
Yes, exactly.
And there's the role, and there's where duality once again opens the middle way. Vega future.
That also was the keys, the tools to their own letting go finally, and their own integration of their their mental and emotional bodies.
And then Earth future. Graduation.
Yeah.
Being the mentors, right? And seeing the one.
Yes.
So many people now are really starting to experience a more and more profound sense of oneness. Yes. Oneness with one another.
Yes.
But oneness with all that is.
Yes. Yes.
With the plants and the trees and the animals and all of creation. Really such an incredible sense of bliss when you really experience that unity. Zeta Reticuli present.
Yes, when they, this is the present timeline?
Yes.
Yes,
Renewed hope.
Their healing, yes, their healing process.
Because they've integrated now some of
They're
that
starting
more human
to,
DNA.
yes. And they're learning how to love, how to feel, how to be tender, how to nurture. It's a big journey for them to get there.
And this is just also positive, Lyssa, because there's no more like darkness around than the Orions, and we don't see the Greys as, being these heartless, emotionless, robotic type beings. We're seeing the humanity in all of the races.
Yes.
I mean, not humanity's stuck to Earth.
I know what you mean.
Yes.
It's true. It's true.
And not that we're stuck here either. Hybrid.
Yes,
Parallel.
hybrid, again, that's like an archetypal card representing basically all different kinds of
Right.
hybrids.
And many, 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 many.
Yeah. Which is the
Yeah.
coming together in the creation of common ground.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the dolphins.
They had to be represented.
Yes. And really connected to Sirius as a way for the non-physical Sirius beings to then express
Yes, exactly.
through the dolphins, and
Yes.
then group consciousness in the whales. And one of the reasons whales are so gigantor.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
And then the future Pleiades.
Mhm. Open contact.
Yes, right. And may they be the first ones to visit, because they would maybe be most resonant with the advancing humans.
Yeah, probably. I think so.
Oh, and here's the whales.
Whales.
Calling our parts home is part of the Sirius future
Yes.
era.
That's one of my favorite cards, number
Oh,
92. Calling my
okay.
part. It's the integration
Okay.
card, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Calling our parts home. The parts we have not wanted to embrace, calling all of it within ourselves, home within us.
Because this is really an expansion of consciousness, where now we're starting to reunite with all these different soul aspects that we've dispersed throughout all these different timelines and
Yes.
dimensions.
Yes.
Right? It's like, this has nothing to do with the movie No One Left Behind or Left Behind. But you sort of get that no one left behind,
Mm-hmm.
because you're reuniting
Yes.
with all of your fragmented aspects
Exactly.
and coming home together as one.
Exactly.
And why it's so important to
And
do
for the
these.
Sirians, that was a big role because they shunned their shadow for a long time. And when they finally integrated it, it was the key to their awakening.
Well, that's a lesson for us
Yes, it
all.
is.
And it's not always easy. I wrote about a practice in my book, Wake Up, about look in the mirror and say, I love you and I forgive you. And to be honest, when I first started doing this practice, and not that it's something I necessarily made up, but it felt appropriate for this time in this book, I couldn't do it. I looked in the mirror and I was like, I love, not really. Right? And I just kept doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it, and all the spiritual practices and meditation and walking, and finally I was able to look in the mirror and said, I love you. I love you, and I know I'm looking back at God, and God is all, and God is love, and so I am love, and I love you, and I mean it. But it was a journey, right? And then the forgiving, too. Same thing. No, I don't! And I had a lot. Like, I felt like I really needed to work through, right? Everything from being a little kid, stealing a pack of gum when I was a kid, you know what I mean? And my mother drugged me into the...
Oh.
I don't even know if I knew you were supposed to pay for it, honestly, but, you know, it's like bad girl. And then all the times from there on, you felt like, you know, like, right, you were a bad girl for whatever reason. And you really, worked through all of that until finally, like Buddhist has a practice I found to be really powerful. There was a book called The Moral Downfalls of the Bodhisattva, something like that. My sister gave it to me and I was like, what does she think I've done? But the practice was really to think of everything or anything that you're hanging on to that you don't feel proud about, it, you feel guilty or shame, or you hurt somebody else, and you just go through it one at a time, and you forgive yourself, you ask for forgiveness, you express regret, even though, you know, that is kind of like, well, you're learning from everything, so really I don't know about regret so much, because it's all lessons learned along the way. But it was sort of like repenting, like sort of in a religious sense, but to declare that you won't repeat that sin again.
Yeah.
It was sort of like, I'm on a path of self-improvement, I'm learning from my mistakes, but I won't be repeating them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because what's the good if you haven't learned the lesson and you're going to try to improve
Yes, exactly.
as a result?
Exactly.
But once I did that practice, and then you had to do some kind of like energetic practice of bowing and what have you. But it was so powerful that I couldn't even remember some of those things
That's
then
great.
after. It was a
Yeah.
powerful letting go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anywho, the Community Association of Worlds. Now, tell me more about this association of worlds, and are we part of it, or do you have to earn a spot?
My understanding of it is that, in general, the active members are those that are interstellar species. But they see us, planets like us, as parts of it, in the sense that they are, protecting us is kind of a dramatic word, but they see us as their responsibility to look after, so to speak.
Okay.
So as we start to awaken in our consciousness, heal things on our planet, get closer and closer to being able to go out into the universe as equals and see ourselves that way, then they take the appropriate steps to welcome us and get us ready for that. So that's them, yeah.
Association of worlds, and now the Zeta Reticuli future. Mere reflection, ultimate evolution, and the paradox.
And the paradox, because they had those big polarities to work through, and they found the middle road.
And then the ultimate paradox being the emptiness and the fulfillment.
Yes.
And then the Esasani.
Yes.
Integrity, alchemy, spiritual sovereignty. And then finally, Orion light.
Germain deliberately changed the name of the last cards from Orion to Orion light because of their dramatic integration and the ending point of emptiness, which is fullness, which is back to the one.
And 108, which we all know is significant, the number of beads on a mala string. And
Yeah. That was not intentional, that's how it worked out.
That's how it worked out, and that's how you know it was perfect.
Yeah.
And the middle card being 54 or 53, that
I know, it's
merged.
amazing.
Right, no, that is amazing. And these cards are incredible. I look forward to using them for readings with many of my clients so interested in their galactic heritage and just the impact of the galactics on our consciousness.
Yes.
So bless you for all the time,
thank
effort,
you.
energy that you put into this and this beautiful book that goes with it. There's different spreads at the back of how you can use them for readings. And so, yeah, really powerful. And of course, we focused on the Prism of Lyra because I've always said Lyra.
It
now I
doesn't
want to say
matter.
Lyra, but
I say Lyra, but it doesn't matter.
I say Lyra, you say Lyra. Tomato. But of course, that's just one of your many books, and the Golden Lake, and
That's the newest one.
The 9 Serpents. Right?
Yeah.
And so, just tell us a little bit about the 9 Serpents.
Okay, so the 9 Serpent, or School of the 9 Serpents is what it's called, is related to the ancient Vegan mysticism. So way back, when they were in their first era, but they were more balanced, and they were still retaining some of the knowledge of the One, they created a spiritual system of you could call it like a spiritual school that was meant to assist us as we went through our incarnational cycles on many different planets, that would help keep the knowledge of the One alive and how to disentangle ourselves from the matrix of illusion that we fall into as we are separated beings. So the 9 Serpent School is actually a non-linear school of 9 schools within it that work with different parts of this awakening process. Much like Hamón and Sasha talk about it, like if you look at a cloth and the fabric of the cloth has nodal points. And when we are not awakened, the cloth is really tight and we can't see light through the cloth, right?
Okay.
But as we start to go through our awakening process, the cloth begins to open and we start to see the light through it. So there are 9 points of where the threads cross. Okay. And each of those 9 points are the different schools. So as you do work in those schools, and it's described a little bit in Golden Lake, as we do work in those schools, the threads become weaker until we're no longer bound into the illusion and we remember our true nature. So this school, apparently, they say, has been on many different civilizations in many different star systems. And it first came to Earth in the East, of course. So the Vedas and all of that, the ancient Hindu teachings, ancient Tibetan, not the current Buddhism, but even earlier. That area of the world, Japan as well, which I do a lot of work in Japan, was the recipients of a lot of these teachings that then later became adapted for humans, and we see their versions of it now. But the essence of it is written about in that book. So they just really started doing these teachings for some of my more advanced students live. And so I'm working on that now, creating that workshop.
The School of Nine Serpents.
School of Nine Serpents.
Oh, I look forward to diving more into that, and then going online and seeing how those schools are available.
At some
online,
point it will
right?
be. Right now I'm working specifically with my students in Japan with
Gotcha.
it. But we're, it's
But that's been wonderful in one way. Unfortunate that you weren't able to travel any longer because of the global pandemic, but at the same time, putting more and more of this material online for global access.
yes, for sure. That has been a gift for me of the pandemic. I've resumed going to Japan now, but it's middle road, meaning that I used to go all the time and I was so exhausted, and now I'm going less, but I'm still doing the online work, so it's a win-win for both of us.
And Ronald built you a beautiful office.
Yes, he did. I have my own Zoom room.
I think you know more about me than I know about me.
I'm trying to remember what I said. What I told you.
Right? You have mad construction skills.
Well, thank you. Yes. Came from the quantum. It was an answer.
There you go. Okay. Channeling your construction worker in the Sirius.
Why not try this?
Right.
Okay.
And then preparing for contact. I love the subtitle, A Metamorphosis of Consciousness. Can you briefly give us an insight into?
Yes. This book is really close to my heart, the Preparing for Contact book. It was originally, the first edition was from 1994, and I had channeled the information about it, about how we can be active participants in the contact process. And for me back then it was cutting edge information, and so the book was sent to the publisher, and then I went to a conference. I was speaking at a conference, and Stephen Greer from CSETI was at the conference speaking. And this is 94, so this was a long time ago. And he was talking about exactly what I had written in the book, and it just blew me away that it was finally coming to our earth plane, and we could start on this process now of actively being a role in contact. So this book is the second edition, which also talks about, it has more channeling of course, but talks about some of the contact work we've done out in the field and the experiences that we've had, and how you too at home can have the contact experience.
And or come to our fall equinox retreat.
That's true.
Here in Sedona, where we are likely going to have access now to a personal property. That's a large 200-acre property, and Alan Steinfeld connected me to an individual who owns that, and he is open to the idea. Now I still have to chat with him this afternoon. But for our fall equinox retreat, ta-da, Lyssa Royal Holt.
This was my wish because we were hoping we wouldn't have to limit it to a small group.
Right, so typically we have to limit it because of access to places. But if we get access to this property, then everyone who attends the retreat can come for a mass CE5 experience, right?
I'm hearing this for the first time now,
Yes.
by the way.
Right, and I just got a text from Alan. He had told me a couple days ago about it, and then he just connected me with this gentleman whose name I won't disclose, but he's given me the contact, and I will call him this afternoon.
Fantastic.
And so it's likely. that we'll be able to do this.
Okay, you have to come to the conference then.
And with the conference, we also do journeys out on the land. And so Lyssa and her and I will discuss where she would most prefer to go, but can take 30 people on this journey. And we have, many other presenters too who will also be taking people on journeys. So there's plenty of opportunity to go on journeys. But also then you'll be teaching a workshop in the main room, which you can have over 250 people in the main room for a workshop. And then also, of course, your presentation. So very just honored, and it's such a privilege, Lyssa, for you to be such an integral part of our fall equinox retreat, September 19th through 21st, right here in Sedona.
I am so excited. I cannot wait. It can't come fast enough, and I really hope all of you will join us.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time today and for coming to Sedona. You have one last book, Millennium, that I don't want to miss. I believe you wrote this a while back.
Yes, this book is 1997 or 1998, before Y2K. And it's a lot of the teachings, the foundational teachings that Germaine and others are still teaching today, but it's a really good starting point for techniques and things like that.
Tools
And
for the
techniques.
coming ages. Very good.
Yes.
Well, thank you for writing these incredible books and creating your deck, and just for decades of service through channeling and teaching. And you're just also a very conscious teacher who over the decades has learned so much, and so are able just to engage in these very conscious conversations about it all.
Yes, I'm very blessed. I'm very, very blessed. I never intended on this being my profession, and suddenly it's 35 years later, almost 40 years, and I'm still doing it, so I guess I have to accept it, right? At this point.
And the millions of people you've touched,
Thank you.
Lyssa, through your books and teachings and offerings.
Thank you.
Truly making a powerful, positive impact on
you.
humanity.
Thank you so much.
And the expansive consciousness, right? Because it's all interconnected in the one.
It is all interconnected, and I know there's lots of other people out there doing similar work, and we all support each other, and together we're raising it. We're raising the frequency.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Now we're headed into the Red Rocks, and we'll see what unfolds out there.
Thank you.
All of our love. Mwah. Don't go away, because Lyssa and I head out into Bell Rock, Sedona's grandfather vortex, where she channels Hamón from Sirius. So here we are out in Bell Rock, and during our fall equinox retreat, we do offer the outdoor journeys with presenters like Lyssa Royal Holt, who will guide 30 people out into a sacred vortex site of Sedona, and there guide teachings, possibly channeling, guided meditations. The tour guide who comes along can tune us into the vortex and play crystal bowls, drumming, tuning forks. It's an extraordinary experience and usually very transformational. And so we wanted to come out here to Bell Rock to just experience the spiraling vortex of the grandfather vortex, Bell Rock, spinning in the clockwise direction, exuding that masculine energy, which for most people has the effect of making them feel empowered, standing in their power. For women, maybe more assertive. And so that's the type of energy people typically experience in the male vortex. But of course, it's an individual experience, and you just kind of see what comes up for you. But it's always going to be of a higher frequency, because anything that's spinning is going to have the higher frequency, the higher vibration, naturally moving you into these states of theta, like you would experience during a deep state of relaxation or trance meditation. You naturally move into those higher brainwave states here in the high vibrational vortex. So it's just fun to be out here, Lyssa, and I know you lived here when there weren't even parking lots at these
Yes,
Red Rock
that's true. That's true. Bell Rock has a special place in my heart. for me, it's always been my favorite because I associate it with contact energy. There is a lot of contact energy here, and back in the day, in the 80s, when I lived in Sedona, we would sometimes go up on Bell Rock and do contact work at night. So this is the perfect place for us to have our chat today.
And do tell, what kind of contact experiences did you have?
Well, back then, contact experience was very different than it is now, at least in my experience. While we might have, different kinds of lights in the sky, what I learned back then was that the internal experience of contact is way more important than the light show that we might see.
Okay.
And basically speaking, when we do contact work, it gives us an opportunity to connect with our multidimensional self, ourselves on other levels of reality, many of which are extraterrestrial in nature. And so this isn't just like an entertainment thing, it's actually facilitating a process of integration within us of our own different parts. And that helps us expand our consciousness and really begin that journey to the one that we were talking about earlier.
When I first came to Sedona, I fell in love with Bell Rock, and it's still my favorite rock.
Me too.
And so I would just hike out here and sit on the rock and just tune into the rock and see what the rock wanted to share with me, what the rock wanted to facilitate bringing through for me. I felt like I had a powerful third eye opening experience on Bell Rock and really felt tuned into this ancient masculine energy of reverence. So I really felt like reverence for the ancient masculine and also this like ancient wisdom.
Yes, absolutely. It was always the sense of that beautiful balance between earth wisdom and cosmic wisdom for me, and that's why I love Bell Rock so much.
And some people think that Bell Rock might be a spaceship. Ready to launch.
Who knows?
We enter the fifth dimension, right? But it does have that connection with our galactics, certainly. Throughout Sedona, at these different red rock locations, the galactics come up so vividly. I remember a friend and I, Melissa Fike, who guides Galactic Akashic readings and has for many years, we were at a really high point out by Sugarloaf where you could oversee almost all the whole landscape of Sedona. And we went into like this sort of telepathic meditation, and it just felt crystal clear, Lyssa, that this was some kind of base for multiple galactic races, like a neutral base.
I would agree with that 100%. That, well, back in the day, again in the 80s, I was part of a book that was channeled. I think it's still in the stores now, called the Sedona Vortex Guidebook. And I was channeling about the different vortexes in the different areas in Sedona and what star energies they're connected to. So it very much is Sedona in a very small area, a concentration of portals for many different star energies.
Oh, how exciting.
No.
And why not still, right?
Right.
And, yes, a lot of these star races do resonate at a much higher spectrum outside of our perception, but we can still feel into it. We can still connect with the consciousness, like Lyssa does through channeling, but also in meditation. And there's also, I feel, just an awareness that you're in the presence of that type of consciousness.
Absolutely, yes. That's another opportunity for doing this kind of work on the land where we can make those connections with the earth and with the cosmos within our bodies, because that's really the only place for integration is right within us. And the energy here certainly can facilitate that.
And when we talk about the seven, the prism, if you will, even those who have been here for quite some time and written many books about Sedona and have also laid out a Sedona grid, they have identified the 7 chakras throughout Sedona, right? With Boynton Canyon being the root chakra, and Bell Rock being the crown chakra, and Airport the solar plexus, and Cathedral the heart chakra, and so on. But it's this sense that there's a different type of consciousness at each one of these different powerful vortex spots. And why wouldn't there be?
Exactly, yes. And I'm struck by remembering when we were having our conversation before, you pulled out in the card deck the Association of Worlds card. And I've always felt also in Sedona, especially in the vortexes, there is a strong energy of the Association of Worlds, which is the coming together of our galactics and giving us an opportunity basically to meet the family in a collective way. So we're also tapping into that energy of the Association of Worlds in Sedona, especially Bell Rock, of course.
And I wonder, Lyssa, if this is true at different sacred temple sites around the world. I mean, certainly Egypt comes to mind with the different temple sites.
Yes, I think it is true, for sure. Egypt, of course, has the strong connection with Orion, but there were also Sirian connections there, Pleiadian connections there. So those sacred sites on our planet are like receptacles for that cosmic energy, to give us an opportunity, especially in the time now where we're moving from the winter cycle into the spring cycle, and we're waking up those seeds that have been planted within us. The sacred sites give us the opportunity to give us a boost of energy to start that awakening process and that remembrance.
And what comes to mind here in the desert Southwest, I'm a tour guide for tourists coming as well as people seeking a spiritual adventure. And one of the stories I like to tell and share, of course, is about the Hopi. And if you lived here, for any amount of time, you know that the Hopi consider Sedona sacred ground. And like the Yavapai and the Apache and the Navajo, they won't reside here in Sedona because they do believe it's not a place to reside or do business. It's really a place to come for ceremony and worship, which they do. And they come here and they do their Kachina dances, they do ceremony and ritual, which is very beautiful. The Hopi story to do with Sedona and just this desert Southwest region is that during the time of the Great Flood, they were ushered into the inner earth by the ant people. Who would you think those ant people might
Founders.
be? Okay.
Which is ushered into the inner earth is like the coming back together for the for being in the womb and growing in the womb before maybe another rebirth into physicality.
I like that. And they say that the time of the Great Flood was the end of the Third Age, and that when the floodwaters receded, they emerged through a sipapu, a dome in the Grand Canyon, and they said when they emerged that they entered the Fourth Age, and there they were met by their god Masao, a blue-faced Kachina from the star Sirius B.
Yes. I didn't know that story, but it makes perfect sense to me because very often the blue-skinned gods are equated with Sirius, and you look at that also within ancient India as well.
Right.
Yes.
Their gods have blue faces.
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so then this god Masao led them to the 3 Hopi mesas north of Flagstaff, which archaeoastronomy shows are perfectly aligned with the 3 belt stars of Orion.
What a surprise. Once again reminding us that one of the reasons we are here is the path of integration. For 3 always represents, at least in Sirian teachings I've received, one polarity, its opposite, and the integration of the 2. So the 3, when you have that type of 3 pyramids, is really a strong message pointing us toward our own integration of polarity.
And they say that today, those blue-faced Kachina still land on the San Francisco Twin Peaks and come down and live amongst them as family, teachers, healers, guides.
That is very true. we know some people that are connected with some tribes, not in Arizona, but who have ongoing contact with star people, and they are indigenous. And it's still ongoing, but it's not publicized because of how sacred it is. It would be totally misunderstood, and of course then everybody's going to be driving out there trying to get in on the action, right? So that sacred contact is still happening to this day, though on a lesser level, so to speak, in a more silent way, until it becomes more open again.
In honor of our beloved past friend Clifford Mahudi, who I spent quite a bit of time with out here in the Red Rocks and out at the V-Bar V Ranch that's just off of 17 here. If you were to go right off of 17 instead of left into the village of Oak Creek, you hit V-Bar V Ranch. And out there's a big wall with all kinds of petroglyphs on it, very accessible. I mean, you could see them at these other sites like Hunanki and stuff, but it's less accessible. If you come to Sedona, this V-Bar V Ranch is very accessible, and you get to see this big wall full of all these petroglyphs. And so I went there with Clifford Mahudi, and he was showing us all of the petroglyphs that were representative of the different star people who came here and walked amongst the indigenous tribes back in the day, when you had the early Yavapai, the early Apache, the Hopi, and also you had what they called the Sinagua, who was a name given to them by the archaeologists who discovered their ruins. But at the same time, they were sort of a local group that migrated through this area and built like Montezuma's Castle and Tuzigoot and such.
That's fascinating. I don't know a lot of the Earth history. I know more of the galactic history, but they definitely align. And it's so important that our indigenous teachers that are still here, that still hold those memories, begin to pass them to people like you and others who can preserve them in a sacred way.
Yes. So here we are in this powerful spiraling vortex, feeling these high vibrational energies, and I don't know about you, but I'm moving into a relaxed state of just feeling really content, really grateful and blessed, Lyssa, for being here with you, and Ron, and just grateful to Sedona herself, the goddess Sedona, for providing this beautiful Red Rock Temple city for us to enjoy. Mother Earth, Mother Gaia.
I'm starting to feel...
Okay.
I think you knew that, right? Yes, somebody's there wanting to give a message. So let's see what comes. I'm starting to get hotter than I was before, which is a good sign. Greetings, my friends. It is I, Hamón. Beautiful to meet you, my friend, my dear, dear sister from ancient times. For those of you that do not know us, we are from the Sirius star system, and we joke with those with whom we speak that whenever the channel is outside, we push Sasha the Pleiadian away because we are the ones that want to come and celebrate this beautiful land and the beautiful energy that is here in Sedona. Going further with what was the conversation a moment ago, we remind each and every one of you that, of course, you know, you have had so many lives, and so many of you have walked the path of indigenous beings, as well as walked the path as extraterrestrial beings, even extraterrestrial beings meeting humans in the ancient days. For truly, as you view the galactic family from above, as you say, there really is no difference between us and humans. We are simply, as you so eloquently said earlier, are different pieces of the disco ball, yes. So we want to throw the ball to you then, for now, and are you inspired at all to converse with us in any particular way?
I would absolutely love to.
Please.
In the early days of this Crystal Temple City, were you present with the Hopi? And if so, how were you serving them at that time?
When we, my people, now we are talking very, very ancient, so you could say it is a different form of my people. When we were present working with the Hopi and other indigenous civilizations on your world, it was for a purpose of grounding truth and the energy of the sacred into the very foundation of the DNA and let's say the light DNA memory. Now we have to say, though Sirian energy was a part of this, Pleiadian energy was a part of this, even in the ancient days, it would go back as far as founder energy, though not in terms of physical contact, but more in terms of contact with what you would call the medicine man or the shaman. And also Arcturus energy as well, because it was really understood at that time that humanity would benefit from having this groundedness of the wisdom that can be carried from age to age to age until it got to a point where the seeds or the ground was fertile enough to begin to sprout those seeds that had been planted so long ago. So yes, we have been present with the indigenous people of your world in various forms, really since their origins as well.
Can you tell us about your connection to the Dogon tribes of North Africa?
Yes. The Dogon tribes have a stronger genetic connection to us because of agreements, of course, we've made with them that allowed us to live more openly among them in ancient times, and in some ways that were appropriate and not creepy, as you would say, intermix with them in a sacred way for sacred purposes, in order to ground your galactic wisdom and galactic energy into the planet. No one's ever really asked that question, so you brought out an answer perhaps we have not spoken about before.
It seems that the Sirian beings who visit the Dogon tribes have taught them very deep knowledge around how creation came into being that only recently theoretical physicists have discovered. Are you still visiting the Dogon tribes and sharing this type of knowledge and wisdom?
Right now, the primary contacts are what you would call through channeling or sacred practices, through consciousness. Though there are sometimes some physical contacts, they are more rare now than they were in the ancient days, simply because of the state of consciousness on your planet. But that may change in the future.
And we can only hope. Egypt.
Yes.
Many say Isis originated from Sirius and Osiris from Orion. Is that true? And if so, why did they come at the time that they did and build the temple sites there?
In your interview earlier today, Lyssa was talking about this idea of how we as extraterrestrials interact with humans by allowing natural law or universal law to flow through us. So in that case then, when these beings came to ancient Egypt, it was, let's say, a compelling pull from the universe for them to come. And very often when we come and are seen as gods, it's not that we have a plan, but we live very much in the moment and do what we know to do with the universe flowing through us in any given moment, and trust that it is what it needs to be. So in those ancient times, you could call it perhaps a nodal point in history, and there are many of those on your world. Those nodal points of history where there's a lot going on, where there's a lot of galactic energy interplaying on your planet. So you could look at the Egyptian civilization, of course, ancient Greece. Those are examples that are more obvious. And if we could say their conscious knowledge of why they were there, if we could summarize that, because why they were there was a lot bigger than what their conscious knowledge held, which was to help humans learn to navigate the challenges ahead through their consciousness. This is one of the reasons for the different types of initiations in ancient Egypt. Initiations, for example, that were held within the Great Pyramid and within other temple sites. Initiations where you might call them life and death initiations, so to speak, where you either succeed, so to speak, in your consciousness or the physical body dies. Those were times of intense, what you might call shamanic training, so that those who were experiencing that training could ground the training into the earth plane and utilize it in the future for their awakening.
It seems we could benefit from temple sites that were doing these types of initiations and teaching in mystery schools. Why are these temple sites like Egypt, like Angkor Wat, like some of the temple sites in the Middle East abandoned today, and will they come back online at some point?
The reason they are abandoned, and we can say even the reason why some of the sites that are not abandoned are still not activated to their full potential, has to do with the human consciousness at this point in time. Now, what I'm going to share with you comes from a Sirian perspective. In my civilization, we got to a point where there was a split in our civilization. There was a group that wanted to integrate and grow and expand, and there was a group that would not look at their own negativity or their own darkness, so they could not expand. And so that group of those that would close themselves and not look at their own shadows and not take responsibility, we're going to be dramatic, okay? We don't mean to be dramatic. It's for the purpose of the analogy. That energy infected the whole. So in my world, it became very difficult for those that wanted to grow and to expand to, in a sense, swim through the energetic sewage of those who would not look at the shadow. So now we go to Earth. Now, you on Earth as a civilization are very much following a kind of Sirian template, though not as intense as what we experienced during our time. What this means is that there are on your world many individuals who are on a healing path, who are willing to look at their shadows, who are willing to process and are not willing to project their stuff upon others. And then you have a path of others who are not willing to do that, who only want to project what the unhealed things within themselves onto others. And so you're seeing that kind of split begin to happen. So now we bring in the sacred sites and temples. Consciousness that goes into those sites, if they are fully activated, and the consciousness is not, in the person, is not integrated, or they are not on a path of their own integration, and they are denying the shadow, the intensity of that is too great. And it would be too disruptive and too disintegrating for a person. So the great consciousness of your mother modulates the energy of the temples and the sacred sites so that individuals who are unprocessed, who go into those sites, will not have a disintegrating experience. As the healing process on your planet continues and grows, as it is doing now, you'll find more and more temple sites, more and more power spots begin to be slowly activated more strongly when the consciousness of those who are not in a healing path can take it or assimilate it. Do you understand what we mean?
I do.
So it's a long answer to your question.
It's like gauging the general level of consciousness on the planet to be in a state of preparedness before those temple sites were activated to prevent further fragmentation.
Exactly. Perfectly stated. Because we go back again to what you were talking about earlier today about how even though it doesn't appear that way, you are all one. So this modulation of the planet's energy is one part of yourself as the one caring for another part of yourself as the one, to make sure that all parts have the opportunity to not fragment further, but to grow at the pace they are able to do so.
With such a diverse level of evolutionary development on our planetary sphere, if there were to be, say, the end of a game and the beginning of a new one, where some were able to, who have mastered this game, advance to the next level of the game, at that same time, would there be those who would play the game again? Does that make sense?
Yes, we understand what you're asking, but we're going to insert another element here that is very challenging for even the most spiritually advanced humans to digest. And it has to do with the idea of frequency and how you are existing in every moment on a multitude of frequencies that are slightly off from each other. So we'll give you an example. Let's say that you are on a path of your integration and you're moving forward with that, but your friend is not. Now, what happens? People often make a story about how they're going to disappear suddenly or something is going to happen, but it's actually much more subtle than that. As you shift, you are pulling in your version of them that is compatible with the version of you that you are becoming. So you might not notice a dramatic shift with that person unless it's necessary for you to see that aspect of it. So there is so much going on, simultaneously, in every moment as your consciousness shifts and rises and falls in frequency, you pull in the reality that is compatible to that frequency. Which makes it confusing, because it's like being in the funhouse mirror, right? You can't see what is real. What is a reflection of me? What is just that person that I need to learn from that's not necessarily a direct reflection of me, etc., etc. That's why always the first stop on this journey is inside. Always, always, always tend your own garden, tend your own energy, and allow the external reality to do what it's going to do, and recognize how significant your even little changes become.
It brings to mind this concept in quantum physics where if you make a certain decision, that you may veer off into another version of a parallel reality, and yourself having made the other decision will veer off into another parallel reality. But in those realities, all of the same people
Yes. Yes.
are there with you. And so is it really your individual reality, and you're projecting these people around you? You're reflecting one another?
Let's add another issue of complexity, or maybe simplicity, depending on how you look at it. You, Suzanne, in this reality now, you have an ego structure, and we are not using ego structure in a negative way. The ego structure is simply your anchor that keeps you in separation for the purposes of you needing to be here. So, unfortunately, the human ego has a tendency to think it can control, or it should control, its reality, and therefore other parallel realities it should understand too. But if we are looking at this idea of fractal realities, slightly off in frequency, as you were talking about, each of those fractal realities has its own ego structure that thinks it is the only one too.
Mm.
So this is where it becomes, as you say, what is your term? We won't use the swear word, but it's a mind F. Yes?
Certainly.
Because the ego, literally the human ego, cannot track this.
Mm-hmm.
But if you, as the quantum physicists are starting to understand, if you begin to understand the concept, then how you understand it more deeply is when you move in your consciousness, like in meditation, for example, and even in contact work, beyond the ego. Then you have a feeling of it where you grok it and you understand it in a way the human ego mind is incapable of doing so.
Mm-hmm. And so overall, it feels as if all along this consciousness journey here on planet Earth, of the utmost priority is the inner self and the development of the inner self, because that really is what dictates the outer world.
Exactly. All you can work with is what you have available to you. And what you have available to you always is your inner self. So if you start there, everything takes care of itself. And at any time that you might think, reality isn't what it should be, no, that's the ego judgment of it. It is not the view of the one, because from the point of view of the one, it's supposed to be skewed or distorted. That's the whole point of this experience. But also the other half of that point is the disentanglement of yourself from that distortion. And again, only that can be done starting within.
Mm-hmm. On the journey from polarity back to unity.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, thank you very much, Hamón.
You are most welcome. Thank you for allowing us to come and play in the Red Rocks. We will, of course, be here playing with your group in September, so we look forward to that. And for now, we send you and the viewers much love.
Thank you.
Join us in Sedona for our Sedona Transcendence Retreat. Sign up for Lyssa's workshop and outdoor journey. Just visit SedonaTranscendenceRetreat.com.